I have always hated the sound of radiators. They clank and hiss with a kind of mechanical resentment, like they remember a time when they were warm and useful, and now, in the deep Vermont winter, they're just angry metal bones. Tonight, the storm is so thick it's pressed the world into silence. The snow piles against the windows, muting even the ambulance sirens. I'm alone in the cancer center, the only doctor on shift, with the wind rattling the glass and the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. I try to focus on my paperwork, but my hands ache with every signature. I flex my fingers, remembering the way they used to move across violin strings, the way music once poured from me like breath. Now, every movement feels like a negotiation with pain. I tell myself I am a doctor first, that music was a past life, but the ache is a ghost that never leaves. It's nearly midnight when I hear the first notes. Piano, impossibly clear, drifting through the empty hallways. The melody is intricate, not the kind of thing you'd hear from a child plinking at keys. It's too beautiful for this place. I freeze, pen hovering above a chart, and listen. The music grows louder, swelling and receding, as if the building itself is breathing with it. I should call security. I should check the monitors. Instead, I follow the sound, drawn down the corridor past darkened patient rooms. My shoes squeak against the linoleum. The air is colder here, heavy with the scent of antiseptic and something older, something like dust and candle wax. The music leads me to the old music therapy room. The door is ajar, light spilling out in a thin, trembling line. I push it open, heart pounding. Inside, an ancient upright piano sits against the far wall, keys yellowed and chipped. And there, perched on the bench, is Emma. She's so small she barely reaches the pedals. Her head is tilted back, eyes closed, fingers moving with impossible grace. Her hospital gown hangs loose on her frail frame, and her bald scalp gleams under the fluorescent lights. I know Emma's chart by heart. 8 years old, terminal brain tumor, profoundly deaf since birth. Scheduled for surgery at the main hospital, not here, not tonight. Yet she plays, and the music swirls around me, filling the room with a warmth that has nothing to do with the broken radiators. I step closer, and the floorboards groan, Emma's hands still on the keys. She turns her head, eyes still shut, and smiles as if she's been expecting me. She reaches out, palm up. I hesitate, then take her hand. Her skin is ice cold, but as our fingers touch, a shock of sensation runs up my arm. Suddenly, the music isn't in the room anymore. It's inside my head, blooming behind my eyes, every note sharp and bright. I can feel it vibrating in my teeth, thrumming in my bones. Emma's lips move. I hear a voice, not in my ears, but in my mind. The music wants to heal, but it needs your help. I stagger back, breaking the contact. The music falters, then resumes, softer now, as if coming from a great distance. Emma's face clouds with pain. Her hand drops to her lap. The heart monitor on the wall begins to shriek. Emma's body goes rigid, then limp. The music in my mind grows louder, frantic, drowning out the alarms. I fumble for the emergency button, shouting for help. Footsteps thunder down the hallway, nurses and orderlies spilling into the room, their faces blanched with panic. But I can't move. The music pins me in place, filling me with a terror I can't name. I watch as they work over Emma's body, their voices muffled, their movements sluggish, as if underwater. The room spins, the piano keys blur, the melody twists, growing discordant, sharp as broken glass. Someone shakes my shoulder. "Dr. Chen, are you with us?" I nod, but I can't speak. The music is still there, pulsing in the back of my mind, refusing to let go. I know with a certainty that chills me to the marrow that nothing in this hospital will ever be the same. I am left standing in the ruins of the melody, the echo of Emma's touch burning on my skin, and the certainty that I have broken some rule I did not know existed. Sleep was a stranger that night. Even after the chaos in the music room faded and Emma was rushed to intensive care, I found myself wandering the halls, unable to shake the sensation of her touch or the echo of that impossible melody. The hospital felt altered, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Every shadow seemed to quiver with anticipation. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, the residue of adrenaline, but the music lingered, a phantom vibration at the base of my skull. Morning brought no relief. The storm outside had worsened, trapping staff and patients alike. The world beyond the windows was a white void, erasing roads and landmarks, isolating us in a cocoon of ice and silence. I watched the snow swirl and pile higher, feeling as if the hospital had slipped out of time, cut off from everything familiar. Emma survived the night, but she did not wake. Her small form lay motionless in the pediatric ICU, features slack, eyelids fluttering with rapid, chaotic dreams. I stood at her bedside, searching for signs of awareness, but she gave nothing away. The nurses tiptoed around her room, their voices hushed, as if afraid to disturb something sacred or dangerous. I tried to lose myself in routine, but the ordinary rhythms of the ward had shifted. Patients in the oncology wing began to ask strange questions. Mrs. Halverson, who rarely spoke, whispered to me that she'd heard a piano playing in her dreams, a song that made her feel light, like a bird. Others described drifting off to sleep and waking with melodies stuck in their heads, harmonies they couldn't quite recall, but which left them feeling oddly peaceful. At first, I dismissed it as coincidence. Music was part of the therapy program after all, even if the piano in the therapy room hadn't been tuned in years. But the reports multiplied. Even staff members started to murmur about hearing faint strains of music late at night, always the same elusive tune. I caught myself humming it under my breath, though I had no memory of learning it. Curiosity became compulsion. I started keeping notes, jotting down every account, every detail that seemed out of place. I noticed a pattern. Those who heard the music slept more soundly, required less pain medication, and in some cases, showed subtle improvements in their conditions. It was as if the melody was working some secret therapy, one that bypassed drugs and protocols. One afternoon, I retreated to the archives in search of distraction. The hospital's basement was a labyrinth of old records, yellowed photographs, and forgotten equipment. Dust hung in the air, disturbed only by the hum of ancient fluorescent lights. I stumbled across a box labeled Music Therapy Room, Historical Documents. Inside, I found brittle sheet music, faded programs from recitals, and a bundle of letters, their ink smudged but legible. The letters were written in a looping, childish hand. They spoke of a boy named Marcus, a prodigy who had lived and died here in 1918 during the Great Influenza Pandemic. He had composed a piece he called The Healing Song, claiming it could mend broken hearts and soothe troubled minds. The final letter ended abruptly, the last bars of his composition trailing off into silence. As I read, a chill crept up my spine. The notes on the page matched the melody I'd heard in my mind, the same music Emma had played. I closed my eyes, tracing the lines with my finger, and felt a shiver of recognition. It was as if Marcus's unfinished song had been waiting, dormant, for someone to bring it to life. I brought the letters to Dr. Peterson, the chief of oncology. He listened politely, then shook his head, his skepticism barely disguised. "Sarah, you're overtired. We all are. This is a hospital, not a haunted house. Patients hear things, especially when they're frightened or medicated." I wanted to argue, to insist that something real was happening, but I saw the exhaustion in his eyes. He was right, in a way. Hospitals were full of ghosts, memories, regrets, unspoken fears. Why should this be any different? But that night, as Peterson made his rounds, he paused outside Emma's room. I watched from the nurse's station as he leaned against the doorframe, his posture tense. Later, he found me in the break room, his face pale. "I heard it," he said quietly, refusing to meet my gaze. The piano, clear as day, and when I checked on Emma, she smiled. She hasn't done that since she was admitted. He left without another word, but the seed of doubt had been planted. I wasn't alone in this. The next morning, I returned to the music therapy room. The piano sat silent, keys dusted with frost. I ran my fingers over the wood, half expecting it to leap to life beneath my touch. Instead, I felt only the cold, the emptiness of a room abandoned by hope. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of my reflection in the window, drawn, haunted, eyes ringed with sleeplessness. For a moment, I thought I saw another figure behind me, a boy in old-fashioned clothes, watching with solemn curiosity. I spun around, but the room was empty. I pressed my palm to the glass, heart racing. The rules of this place had changed. The boundaries between past and present, life and death, had thinned. I could feel it in the air, in the way the music lingered just out of reach, promising answers I wasn't sure I wanted. Back in the ward, the patient's stories grew stranger. Mr. Callahan, a gruff former firefighter, claimed the music had shown him memories of his childhood, moments he'd long forgotten. A young mother with leukemia wept as she described a dream in which the notes became colors, swirling around her daughter's face, easing her pain. I recorded everything, desperate to make sense of it. The more I learned, the less I understood. Was Emma channeling Marcus's unfinished work? Was the hospital itself amplifying his lost intentions? Or was I succumbing to the collective stress, my mind inventing patterns where none existed? One evening, as I sat by Emma's bedside, her hand twitched in mine. Her eyelids fluttered, and for an instant, I thought she might wake. Instead, her lips parted, and a single, breathless word escaped. "Help." The monitors beeped steadily, indifferent to my rise in panic. I squeezed her hand, whispering that I was there, that I would do whatever she needed. But she slipped back into silence, leaving me with the weight of her plea. I wandered the halls, searching for comfort, but the music found me first. It crept through the vents, seeped into the walls, curled around my thoughts like smoke. I began to dread the quiet moments, afraid of what I might hear or remember. Late one night, I dreamed of the music room. The piano was alive, its keys moving without hands, the melody twisting into something wild and mournful. Marcus stood beside Emma, his eyes hollow, his fingers stained with ink. He beckoned me closer, whispering secrets I could not understand. I woke gasping, drenched in sweat, the song still ringing in my ears. The boundaries between dream and waking had blurred. I wondered if I was losing my mind, or if I was finally seeing the truth. The next day, Dr. Peterson approached me, his manner subdued. "I want you to document everything," he said. Every patient, every dream, every note of that song. If something is happening here, we need to understand it. But we keep this between us. No rumors, no panic. I agreed, relieved to share the burden. Together, we began to investigate, piecing together the fragments of melody and memory. The hospital became our labyrinth, each corridor a thread leading deeper into the unknown. As the storm raged outside, sealing us in, I realized there was no turning back. The music had chosen us, and whatever rules governed this place, we were bound to follow them, no matter where they led. The days blurred together, each one colder and stranger than the last. The storm outside showed no sign of relenting, and the hospital's world shrank to the flickering glow of its corridors and the hush of snow pressing against the windows. I could feel the tension in every conversation, as if the walls themselves were eavesdropping, waiting for us to slip. Dr. Peterson and I became conspirators, bound by the secret of the music. We gathered in his cramped office, poring over my notes and the old letters from Marcus. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and anxiety. We spoke in low voices, careful not to be overheard. Every so often, I caught Peterson glancing at the door as if expecting someone or something to interrupt. We decided to test the phenomenon. Peterson arranged for 5 terminal patients who had reported hearing the music to gather in the old therapy room. It was a risk, but curiosity outweighed caution. We wheeled in a battered EEG machine, its cables snaking across the floor like veins. The patients sat in a semicircle, their faces drawn but expectant. I explained what we were trying to do, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. If you hear the music, just relax and let it happen. We'll be monitoring your brain waves, looking for patterns. They nodded, some with hope, others with resignation. I started the EEG, the machine's lights blinking in the dimness. For a long moment, nothing happened. The room was silent except for the soft hum of electricity. Then, as if on cue, the air changed. A subtle vibration, a shift in pressure, like the moment before a thunderstorm. The patient's eyes fluttered closed. One by one, their faces relaxed, tension melting away. The EEG monitor began to spike and dip in perfect synchrony, the lines dancing in harmony. I stared at the screen, unable to believe what I was seeing. The patterns matched those seen in deep meditation, the kind associated with healing and restoration. Peterson's hand tightened on my shoulder. "This isn't possible," he whispered, but his voice was tinged with awe. The session lasted 15 minutes. When it ended, the patients woke as if from a pleasant dream. Mrs. Halverson smiled for the first time in weeks. "I saw colors," she murmured, "and I wasn't afraid." Word spread quickly, despite our efforts to contain it. Nurses whispered in the break room, their eyes wide with a mix of hope and fear. The administration caught wind of our experiment and summoned us for a meeting. The conference room was cold, the windows fogged with condensation. Dr. Singh, the hospital director, fixed us with a steely glare. "This is highly irregular," she said. "We cannot allow unsanctioned studies, especially ones that might endanger patients. If you persist, there will be consequences." Peterson tried to argue, but Singh's mind was made up. "I will not have this hospital become the subject of ridicule. End it, or I will." Afterward, Peterson slumped in his chair, rubbing his temples. "We can't stop now. There's something here, Sarah. Something that could change everything." I agreed, But fear gnawed at me. The music was growing stronger, more insistent. I heard it in the quiet moments, felt it in the trembling of my hands. Emma remained in her coma, her body fragile, but her presence was everywhere. Sometimes, I thought I saw her shadow flit across the edge of my vision, a silent reminder of the rules I was breaking. One night, as I sat by her bed, her fingers twitched, her eyelids fluttered, and then, impossibly, she opened her eyes. They were clear, lucid, filled with a knowledge that made me shiver. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice raw but steady. "I can hear." Tears sprang to my eyes. "Emma, you're awake. You're really awake." She smiled, a small secret smile. "Marcus is teaching me. The music. It's not just for me. I can help others, but it's hard. Every time I share it, I get tired. You have to help me." I promised I would. Over the next days, Emma's recovery stunned the staff. Her tumor shrank, her hearing returned, and she seemed to glow with a quiet energy. But each time she touched a patient and shared the music, she grew weaker, her skin paling, her eyes sinking deeper into their sockets. Peterson and I continued our research in secret. We recorded brain waves, tracked patient outcomes, and tried to piece together the puzzle. The data was undeniable. Those who experienced the music improved, sometimes dramatically. Yet the cost to Emma was steep. The administration's warnings became threats. Rumors swirled. Some said we were conducting dangerous experiments. Others whispered about miracles. The tension in the hospital was a living thing, coiling tighter with every passing hour. One evening, as I played my violin in the therapy room, Emma joined me. Her hands trembled, but her touch was sure. As our music intertwined, I felt a surge of energy, a warmth that spread from my damaged fingers, up my arms, and into my chest. For the first time in years, the pain faded. My hands moved with a freedom I thought I'd lost forever. Emma looked at me, her eyes shining. "You can help too. The music isn't just mine. It's for anyone who listens." But with each session, she grew frailer. I watched the light dim in her eyes, the shadows deepen on her face. I was torn between the desire to help others and the fear of losing her. The rules had changed, but I didn't know if I was strong enough to face the consequences. Then the reports began to arrive from other hospitals. Children with musical gifts, patients hearing melodies in their dreams, inexplicable recoveries. The phenomenon was spreading, slipping beyond our control. I stood at Emma's bedside, the weight of responsibility pressing down on me. She reached for my hand, her grip weak but determined. "It's not just about healing," she whispered. "It's about listening, about letting go." Her words echoed in my mind as the storm outside finally began to break, the first rays of sunlight piercing the gloom. But inside, the music only grew louder, a promise and a warning woven into every note. The world outside thawed, but inside the hospital, the chill remained. The storm's retreat brought a hush, as if the snow had buried something deeper than roads and fences. I found myself waking before dawn, drawn to the archives as if the answers I needed were waiting in the dark, among the dust and forgotten things. The old music therapy room became my sanctuary and my prison, the air always tinged with a scent of wax and mildew, the piano looming in the half-light like a relic from another life. Emma's recovery was the talk of the ward, though no one dared speak of it openly. Her hearing had returned, her tumor shrinking with each day, but she moved through the halls like a shadow, her eyes distant, her steps unsteady. The children watched her with a mix of awe and fear. Some reached for her hand, hoping for a miracle of their own. Others kept their distance, as if Emma's presence might draw them into the same strange current. Peterson and I worked in secret, our research hidden behind locked doors and whispered conversations. We pored over the data, the EEG readings, the patient testimonies. The patterns were undeniable. Those who heard the music improved, sometimes dramatically. Yet the cost to Emma, and now to others, was impossible to ignore. The more she channeled the music, the weaker she became. Her skin grew translucent, her voice a fading echo. One evening, as dusk pressed against the windows, I found a box in the archives that hadn't been there before. It was marked with a single word: Marcus. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside, I found a stack of yellowed sheet music, each page covered in frantic, looping script. There were sketches of harmonies, diagrams of frequencies, and notes scrawled in the margins. For the heart, for the mind, for the soul. At the bottom of the box, I discovered a faded photograph. A boy with solemn eyes, seated at a piano, his hands poised above the keys. I spent hours deciphering Marcus's notes, piecing together the fragments of his unfinished composition. The melodies were strange, shifting, never quite resolving. But as I played them on the violin, I felt something stir in the air, a resonance, a vibration that seemed to reach beyond the walls of the hospital. It was as if Marcus had encoded a message in the music, a blueprint for healing that transcended time. I shared my findings with Peterson, who listened in silence, his skepticism eroding with each new revelation. "It's as if he knew," he murmured, tracing the lines of the composition with his finger. "As if he was trying to leave something behind for us to find." Desperate for answers, I reached out to Dr. Elena Ruiz, a physicist at the university who specialized in consciousness studies. She arrived one icy morning, her breath clouding in the frigid air, her eyes sharp with curiosity. I showed her the EEG data, the patient reports, the music itself. She listened, then began to speak of frequencies and resonance, of the possibility that consciousness could exist on a spectrum, like light or sound. "Perhaps what you're witnessing is a kind of resonance healing," she said, her voice low. "A bridge between the neurological and the metaphysical. Marcus may have stumbled onto something we're only beginning to understand." Her words unsettled me. The idea that music could shape reality, could heal or harm, was both thrilling and terrifying. I thought of Emma, of the toll the music was taking on her small body. I wondered if we were meddling with forces we couldn't control. Emma, for her part, seemed to sense the shift. She began to train other children, 3 at first, each with their own unique gifts. There was Lily, whose humming soothed pain; Daniel, whose drumming cleared the fog of confusion from the minds of the elderly; and Jacob, who played the flute and brought moments of clarity to those lost in dementia. Together, they formed a strange, fragile choir, their music weaving through the hospital like a living thing. But the price was steep. The children grew pale, their energy sapped with each session. Their parents pleaded with us to stop, to let their children rest. But the children insisted it was their choice. "The music wants to help," Emma said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "We have to listen." I watched as Emma's hands shook, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. I wanted to protect her, to shield her from the weight of expectation, but she was resolute. "This is what I'm meant to do," she told me one night, her gaze steady. "But it's not just for us. You have to play too." Reluctantly, I picked up my violin, my fingers still stiff but stronger than before. As I played alongside Emma, something extraordinary happened. The music swelled, filling the room with a warmth that seemed to pulse in time with our hearts. My pain faded, replaced by a sense of connection, as if I was part of something vast and ancient. The hospital administration grew increasingly hostile, their warnings sharpening into threats. "You're endangering these children," Dr. Singh accused, her voice brittle with fear. "If you persist, I'll have no choice but to suspend you." Peterson tried to shield me, but the pressure mounted. Rumors spread. Some called us miracle workers. Others accused us of witchcraft. The staff was divided, their loyalties shifting with every new recovery, every unexplained remission. One night, as I walked the empty corridors, I heard the music again, not from the therapy room, but from every corner of the hospital. It was as if the walls themselves had learned the melody, as if Marcus's legacy had seeped into the very bones of the building. I paused outside Emma's room, watching her sleep. Her breathing was shallow, her skin almost translucent in the moonlight. I realized with a jolt of terror that we were running out of time. The music was healing others, but it was consuming her. I sat by her bedside, holding her hand, and whispered a promise. "I'll find a way to help you. I won't let the music take you." She squeezed my fingers, her grip surprisingly strong. "You have to trust the song, Sarah. It knows what it's doing." As dawn crept over the snow, painting the world in shades of gold and blue, I understood that the rules had changed once again. The music was no longer just a gift or a curse. It was a legacy, a burden and a blessing, passed down through generations, waiting for someone to listen. And I was listening, even as the melody grew stranger, more insistent, beckoning me toward a truth I could barely comprehend. The hospital's atmosphere had changed. It wasn't just the thawing snow, or the way sunlight finally filtered through the grimy windows. There was a new current running beneath the surface, a pulse that connected every room, every patient, every sleepless staff member. I felt it in the way strangers exchanged knowing glances, in the hush that fell whenever Emma's name was spoken. The music was no longer confined to the therapy room or the minds of a chosen few. It had spread, seeping into the very bones of the building, weaving us together in ways I couldn't begin to untangle. Emma's circle of children grew. Lily, Daniel, and Jacob, each with their own fragile gift, became the nucleus of something larger. Word of their healing spread quietly at first, whispered from one desperate parent to another. Soon, families began arriving from distant towns, braving icy roads and bureaucratic resistance for a chance at hope. The children worked together, their music overlapping and diverging, creating harmonies that shimmered through the air like heat on pavement. I watched them, torn between awe and dread. For every patient who left the hospital stronger, there was a cost. The children's health faltered. Emma's cheeks hollowed. Lily's voice grew thin. Daniel's laughter faded. Their parents pleaded with us to stop, to let them rest, but the children insisted. The music wasn't just theirs. It belonged to everyone who needed it. Peterson and I tried to manage the flow, to shield the children from the worst of the demand, but the phenomenon was slipping from our grasp. Former patients, those who had been tuned by the children, began to exhibit faint echoes of the gift. A mother who had recovered from leukemia soothed her son's nightmares with a lullaby that shimmered with the same strange resonance. An elderly man, once lost to dementia, played a single note on a harmonica and brought clarity to a confused roommate. The music was multiplying, branching outward in unpredictable ways. News of these miracles could not be contained. Local reporters caught wind, their stories quickly picked up by national outlets. The music children, they called them, splashing Emma's pale face across headlines and screens. The hospital became a pilgrimage site. Some came seeking healing, others to debunk what they saw as a dangerous myth. The administration, already stretched thin, struggled to maintain order. Security guards turned away crowds at the doors, but still they came, pressing against the glass, humming snatches of melody they couldn't explain. Not everyone welcomed this new order. A pharmaceutical company, threatened by the sudden drop in demand for painkillers and sedatives, launched a campaign to discredit our work. They hired a well-known skeptic, Dr. Randall, who arrived with cameras and a sneer. He accused us of exploiting sick children, of fostering mass hysteria. His interviews were combative, his questions barbed. "Isn't it dangerous to encourage this kind of magical thinking?" he demanded, thrusting a microphone at me. "Aren't you giving people false hope?" I wanted to scream, to tell him about the nights I'd spent holding Emma's hand, about the way my own hands had healed beneath her touch. Instead, I spoke quietly, refusing to rise to his bait. "We're not promising miracles. We're listening, that's all." But the damage was done. The media storm divided the medical community. Some hospitals banned any mention of resonance healing, threatening staff with termination. Others, more quietly, reached out to us, seeking guidance. Families began to arrive in secret, slipping through side doors, desperate for a chance at something that might save their loved ones. The pressure took its toll. Peterson, once steady as bedrock, grew withdrawn. His hair grayed at the temples, his eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. He faced mounting scrutiny from the medical board, called to justify every decision, every deviation from protocol. I tried to support him, but my own life was unraveling. My fiancée, already uneasy with my obsession, grew distant. Our conversations turned brittle, punctuated by silences that stretched too long. "You're losing yourself in this," he said one night, his voice tight with worry. "You can't save everyone, Sarah." I wanted to tell him that I didn't have a choice, that the music had claimed me, just as it had claimed Emma and the others. But the words stuck in my throat, heavy with guilt and longing. Emma's condition worsened. She moved through the hospital like a wraith, her steps slower, her voice barely more than a whisper. One evening, I found her sitting alone in the music room, her hands folded in her lap. She looked up as I entered, her eyes luminous in the half-light. "Marcus is fading," she said softly. "He's almost finished. Soon, the music will leave us." Panic flared in my chest. "What do you mean? What will happen to you?" She smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "We'll lose the gift, but not before we can teach others, adults this time. The music wants to stay, but it needs new voices." I sat beside her, the piano's keys cold beneath my fingertips. "Are you afraid?" She shook her head. "Number, I'm tired, but I'm not afraid." The days that followed were a blur of lessons and farewells. Emma and the children trained a handful of adults, nurses, volunteers, even a few patients, passing on what they could before their strength gave out. The music grew fainter, but its echoes lingered. a web of connection that refused to break. The hospital became a place of contradictions, hope and grief, healing and loss, wonder and suspicion. Some nights, I wandered the halls, listening for the music, fearing the silence that might follow. Other times, I played my violin for Emma and the others, letting the notes carry my sorrow and gratitude into the shadows. The world outside moved on, but inside, we were changed. The rules had shifted again. The music was no longer a secret, no longer ours alone. It belonged to everyone who had heard it, everyone who had been changed by its touch. And as I watched Emma drift into sleep, her breathing shallow but peaceful, I realized that the true legacy of the music was not in the miracles or the headlines, but in the network of souls it had woven together, a tapestry of hope and longing, stretched across the silence of winter, waiting for the next note to be played. The hospital's hush deepened as dusk settled, and the world outside faded into a blue shadow. The music was everywhere now, not just in the therapy room or in the minds of those who had heard it, but in the pulse of the building itself. Every corridor seemed to vibrate with anticipation, every surface humming with a resonance that was both comforting and unnerving. I moved through the halls as if in a trance, drawn toward Emma's room by an invisible thread. Inside, the air was thick with expectation. Candles flickered on every surface, their flames sending restless shapes across the walls. Former patients, staff, and families gathered in a circle around Emma's bed, their faces illuminated by hope and dread in equal measure. The children who had once carried the music sat close, hands clasped, eyes shining with the knowledge of what was about to unfold. Emma looked impossibly small, her body frail beneath the blankets, but her gaze was clear and unwavering. She met my eyes and gave a faint smile. "It's time, Sarah. Marcus's song is ready." I nodded, unable to speak. My violin felt heavy in my hands, the wood cool against my skin. I took my place beside Emma, the circle tightening around us. The room was silent except for the soft click of the IV pump and the distant hum of the hospital's old heating system. Emma's voice, though barely more than a whisper, carried through the hush. "Everyone, hold hands. Breathe together. The music needs all of us." The circle obeyed, and a shiver ran through the room as the living amplifier took shape. A web of souls, each person lending strength to the next. I lifted my bow and began to play, letting the first notes drift into the charged air. The melody was Marcus's, but it had changed, grown richer, more complex, filled with the echoes of every patient, every healer, every moment of hope and fear that had passed through these walls. Emma's breathing matched the rhythm, her lips moving in silent harmony. As the music swelled, I felt a warmth spread through my hands, a tingling that chased away the ache and stiffness that had haunted me for years. The notes seemed to pour from somewhere deeper than memory, as if I was channeling not just Marcus's song, but the collective longing of everyone in the room. The circle tightened, breaths synchronized, and the resonance grew, an invisible current that pulsed from Emma outward, filling the hospital with light. Suddenly, Emma's body arched, her face contorted in pain. The monitors shrieked, lines spiking and falling in jagged patterns. The music faltered, twisting into a discordant wail. I faltered, bow trembling, heart pounding. Emma's eyes found mine, wide and desperate. "Sarah, you have to finish it. Take what's left. Carry it forward." Tears blurred my vision, but I kept playing, forcing the melody back into shape. Emma's hand reached for mine, fingers icy but determined. As our skin touched, a surge of energy shot through me, hot, electric, ancient. I felt the music settle inside me, a new rhythm syncing with my pulse. The pain in my hands vanished, replaced by a sense of power and clarity I hadn't known since before the accident. The discord resolved, the melody soaring once more. Emma's body relaxed, her breathing slowing. The monitors steadied, and the hush in the room broke as people gasped and sobbed, the tension dissolving in a wave of relief. In the days that followed, Emma's tumor disappeared. The doctors called it a miracle, a medical anomaly, but I knew better. Marcus's spirit had been the tether, the force sustaining the cancer and the music alike. With the song complete, the connection had shifted, no longer a burden for Emma alone, but a gift to be shared. Emma's strength returned, though she was changed. She no longer needed to channel the music through touch. Instead, she taught others to awaken their own healing frequencies. Adults and children alike learned to listen, to hum, to play, each discovering their own unique resonance. Emma became the youngest professor of resonance medicine, her presence a bridge between the seen and the unseen. The hospital transformed. The music therapy center expanded, drawing patients from across the country. People came not just for treatment, but to learn, to participate, to become part of the symphony. Even the pharmaceutical company that had once tried to silence us began to fund research, recognizing that combining traditional medicine with resonance therapy offered new hope. One afternoon, as I played my violin in the new therapy center, Emma conducted a children's orchestra composed of former patients. The music no longer came from beyond. It rose from the hearts of those who had been healed, a living testament to the power of connection. In a quiet corner, a young boy with leukemia sat, tears streaming down his face as the music washed over him. Emma noticed, walked over, and placed her hand gently on his shoulder. "Would you like to learn how to play?" she asked, her voice gentle. The cycle of healing continued, passed from the living to the living, a testament to what we had built together. And as the final notes lingered in the air, I understood. This was not an ending, but a beginning, an eternal symphony, echoing through every soul willing to listen. The seasons shifted, and with them, the hospital's rhythm changed. Where once the air had been heavy with dread and uncertainty, now it hummed with a kind of quiet anticipation. The music that had haunted us, sometimes a balm, sometimes a curse, had become woven into daily life, less a miracle and more a secret language spoken by those who had learned to listen. Yet, even as the world outside thawed and the trees budded with new leaves, I felt the weight of everything we had survived and everything we had lost. Emma flourished in ways that defied every prediction. Her laughter, once a rare and fragile thing, now rang out in the corridors, drawing smiles from even the most hardened nurses. She moved with a confidence that was almost eerie, as if she carried within her the memory of every note, every healing, every sacrifice. The other children, too, found their strength returning, though none of them ever spoke of the music's power in the same way again. It was as if the gift had changed shape, become something subtler, something that lived in the spaces between words and gestures. The music therapy center had transformed. Where once it was a forgotten room with a battered piano, now it was the heart of the hospital, a place where patients and families gathered not just for treatment, But for solace, the walls were lined with photographs of those who had found healing here, their faces illuminated by the soft golden light that filtered through stained glass windows. The piano, newly restored, stood at the center, its keys worn smooth by countless hands. I found myself drawn to the center each afternoon, violin in hand, letting the music guide me. Sometimes Emma would join me, conducting the children's orchestra with a grace that belied her years. Other times, I played alone, the notes rising and falling like breath, carrying with them the memory of Marcus and all those who had come before. One afternoon, as the sun slanted through the windows and dust motes danced in the air, I noticed a new patient sitting in the corner. He was small and thin, his skin pale beneath the hospital lights. His eyes were wide, fixed on the orchestra with a longing that was almost painful to witness. Tears traced silent paths down his cheeks as he listened, his hands clenched in his lap. Emma saw him too. She set down her baton and crossed the room, her steps light and sure. She knelt beside him, her voice gentle. "Would you like to learn how to play?" she asked. The boy nodded, unable to speak. Emma took his hand and led him to the piano, guiding his fingers to the keys. The first notes were hesitant, uncertain, but as Emma played beside him, a tentative melody emerged, fragile, searching, but unmistakably alive. The other children joined in, weaving their own harmonies around his, and soon the room was filled with a music that was both new and achingly familiar. I watched, heart full, as the boy's face lit up with wonder. In that moment, I understood. The music was no longer a burden to be carried by a chosen few. It belonged to all of us now, a thread binding patient to healer, past to present, sorrow to hope. The rules that had once governed the music, who could hear it, who could heal, who must pay the price, had been rewritten not by any one person, but by the collective will of those who refused to let go of wonder. Sometimes Emma would join me, her hands dancing over the piano keys. Other times, I played alone, comforted by the knowledge that I was never truly solitary, not anymore. The faces in the photographs watched over us, silent witnesses to everything we had endured. I often wondered what Marcus would think if he could see us now, his unfinished song finally complete, its echoes rippling outward through time and memory. I hoped he would understand that his legacy was not in any one melody, but in the courage to listen, to heal, to hope. The hospital was no longer just a place of endings. It had become a place of beginnings, a sanctuary where the wounded could find not just treatment, but transformation. The music was everywhere, in the laughter of children, in the quiet conversations between nurses, in the footsteps of those who had learned to walk again. And always, there was the promise of more. The music would continue, passed from hand to hand, heart to heart, as long as there were those willing to listen. On the last evening of winter, as the first stars appeared above the snow-laden trees, Emma and I played together one final time. The room was full. Patients, staff, families, all gathered to bear witness. The melody rose and fell, winding through the crowd, drawing forth laughter and tears in equal measure. When the last note faded, the silence that followed was not empty, but full, charged with the knowledge that something extraordinary had happened here, something that could never be undone. Emma turned to me, her eyes shining. "It's your turn now, Sarah. The music is yours to carry." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle into my bones. I knew I would never be the same. None of us would. The music lingers still, in the hush before dawn, in the spaces between words, in the quiet courage of those who choose to heal. It is the silent symphony, eternal and unfinished, waiting for the next listener to join in.